Hello and welcome back to this ec3 lecture on monetary policy. And now we continue by looking at the arguments for thinking that in the short run, aggregate supply is sloping, is affected by prices, even if it is not affected by prices in the long run.
So really, it shouldn't really matter what the price level is in terms of your output decision, because though you get more or less money, the price of everything else has changed by the same amount. So it should be vertical. So why is it that we still draw it sloping like this? And there are reasons, and several reasons. And I always find that each individual student understands one or two of these reasons better than the other one. And there's some that make more sense to each person and others they struggle with. So these are the three we're looking at: the misperceptions theory, sticky wage theory, sticky price theory. Misperception theory is this: changes in the overall price level, because we don't have perfect information about what's going on. A lower price level, so the price level falls, it causes misperceptions about relative prices. Because if I'm making, to pick a product out of the blue, large silver microphones for recording lectures on, if I'm making that, I think all day about how I'm going to make those better, how I'm going to market them and appeal to people better, what the price is, how much I'm making each day for those things. So as soon as the general price level in the economy falls, the thing I notice, hey, the price of my microphones is going down. Those wines, what are they doing? I immediately worry about that. That's the thing that jumps out at me first. So I think to myself, hey, this is no longer so profitable. I bring up my factory and say, look, tone down production next week. We're not making enough cash out of these things. We'll move on to some different kind of format. Because I don't realise that what's really happened is that the price of everything has gone down. So the misperceptions like that, they mean that each person, because they have more information about the thing they're producing, that's what they're focused on, they think the price of what they're producing relative to everything else has gone down. So they cut supply. The sticky wage theory is that nominal wages, in other words, nominal in terms of the number of dollars rather than the real value, they take a while to adjust. So in the factory that makes my silver things, when the price goes down, I'm making less money from selling them, but I can't immediately give a wage cut to people unless we're in the world of 0 hours contracts, assuming most of my workforce are on reasonably human contracts. I can't just slash their wages straight away. It's going to take a while for me to slash their wages. I'll do it next month. But for now, I'm stuck. So which means my production becomes less profitable because they're still going to get the wages we've agreed. Meanwhile, my microphones are bringing in less money. They're less profitable, so I have to cut production. So it makes employment and production less profitable. So unless I can cut their wages, I'm going to have to tell them to make less, and perhaps even lay some of them off, because I can't afford to pay what I promised. So it induces firms to reduce quantities supplied. Sticky price theory is similar. I've already contracted with universities all around the world to supply these things for a certain amount. I've already announced the price of these things, is what I mean, and it takes time for me to change the prices of this stuff. I mean, yeah, in some ways this is something that one of the classical explanations that has not lived so well, because these days things can adjust much more rapidly. But because I've got higher than prices than are desired, then the things which don't adjust so quickly, nobody's buying those things as the general price level goes down, because they now look expensive. So that a few of those things are sold. So for all of those reasons, we draw the short run aggregate supply as sloping. And you may find some reasons more convincing than others. But we agree that in all cases, in the long run, it reverts to it doesn't make any difference. So it's vertically sloping. So this is the complete picture. So when you're using this to analyze policies or events, then some events can impact any one of these curves. If it's deliberate policy, fiscal policy or monetary policy, it's going to shift the AD curve. Some supply shock maybe a shortage of fuel suddenly because maybe Saudi Arabia or other actors have put the prices up suddenly or stopped supplying. War in Iraq or Syria can have that effect, or blockage in the Gulf. Large-scale strike action. Factors influencing the long-run supply are more to do with things that have long-run effects. So a massive investment by a multinational company, or just running out of reserves in terms of natural resource reserves. That's not something which is going to go away. It's going to last for a few years, that effect. So to see what the effect of the short run in the short run is, you just move the correct curve. So say, is this policy, is this event, is it affecting demand or supply, AD, AS, SRAS, or long run aggregate supply? Is it pushing it, increasing it, or decreasing it? So to analyse the short run effects, you just move the right curve and read it off. The long run adjustment, however, is easy, because if we assume that there's no further events or policies to intervene, just the market, individual actors taking their decisions is what moves us back to equilibrium. In this model always assumes this short run aggregate supply moves back to meet the other two curves. That's because all those explanations for why it's sloping, they gradually wear away over time, because people realise, hey, wait a minute, the price of my microphone has gone down, but the price of everything's gone down. So I'm still getting the same real price. So hey, go back to normal. Or the workers in the factory, we can negotiate with them and say, hey, look, these things are not bringing in the same amount of money, but you don't need so much money anyway, because everything in the economy is cut. So we can just cut your wages, or not increase them so much without it being a real terms hit to you. Or the price, the sticky prices thing, we've got time to readjust the prices to match the fall in prices more widely. So in the long run, you just adjust back to the situation before, because you realise that this price change has affected everything. So you should be producing the same amount as before. So it's always the short run aggregate supply that moves back to meet the other two curves. So here's an example. Let's say there's been a fall in aggregate demand. It could be contractionally fiscal or monetary policy. So contractionally fiscal, maybe the World Bank has got on your shoulder and say, hey, look, you guys, we're going to give you some aid, but you've got to cut your terribly inefficient government spending and slash that, throw some government workers out. Or monetary policy, you need to increase interest rates, in other words, cut the money supply to fight inflation, for example. So number one is here. So the blue lines are the initial position. So A is the initial position here, where aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply, long run aggregate supply are all in equilibrium. That's the level of output. That's the price level. The first thing that happens is we move this aggregate demand line downwards, because we've got contractionary fiscal or monetary policy going on. So contractionary policy pulls the demand in. So you move along the short run supply curve to point B, because as I said, people see the price level falling for the sticky wages, misperceptions, sticky prices. In the short term, they start cutting production. So price level falls and output falls, unemployment rises back to here. So the short run situation is you've got a fall in employment, fall in output, and a fall in price level. In other words, a fall in inflation. So inflation's reduced. That's the short run situation. In the longer term, however, producers start to realise this is just a change in the whole price level. My stuff is still worth the same as it was before compared to all the other prices in the economy. So I should really be producing back up this level. So they start to increase their production. But because demand has changed, they don't go up to here. You go back along this line to there. So in the long term, you end up with the same level of output, same level of income, but a lower price level, which really means just a lower level of inflation. So the cut to aggregate demand has a short-term hit on inflation and output, but long-term, it doesn't affect output. Long-term, the effect is just to decrease inflationary pressure. So that's the short and the long-term analysis with this model. Okay, so the AD-AS model of the whole economy looks at demand and supply, but for all goods at each price level. It relates to the ISLM model by adding in this idea that prices can change and seeing what happens in terms of how that affects demand. through changes in the real value of money. It lets you analyse policy both in the short run and then how that adjusts back to the long run equilibrium. And it's often used for analysing either deliberate policy of the government or shocks, other events that have happened, either by private actors or force events of nature, earthquakes and so on. Okay, next we turn to the effects of inflation after a short break.